I'm going to talk in this segment about a short story by Nikolai Gogol, the Russian writer. And this story is called, in some places it's called The Government Inspector, but in my translation, The Inspector General. And with this, I'm going to temporarily close out, or at least hit the pause button on my series on Russian literature. There's some other things I want to start pulling into the podcast, and I don't want to make this sort of a 10-week course. But later, I will pick this theme up and deal. This is a nice kind of place to pause, because having covered the introduction to Russian literature, having covered some of Pushkin and now Gogol, it's good to take a break, I think, and then pick up with figures like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy a little bit later. Now, Gogol is a writer of the macabre, but he has a kind of a ghoulish sense of humor, and he has his own distinctive style. It's said by someone, it is impossible to confuse a story of Gogol with a story of anyone else. And Gogol has written such works as, I referred to his short story called The Nose. He's written a longer work, a novel called Dead Souls, and a very famous story, which I urge you to read, called The Overcoat. But what's cool about this story called The Inspector General is it's actually not one of Gogol's crazier stories. It's set sort of in a town in Russia, and the town is full of, incompetence and greed and corruption, and people are on the take, and the mayor is running a kind of a racket. In fact, the mayor admits everybody's doing some sort of indiscretion, and this is the school teachers are not really teaching, and Gogol populates this town with all kinds of characters. I mean, there's a school teacher who's like out of control. In fact, his sole passion is Alexander the Great. And whenever the topic of Alexander the Great comes up, he gets so excited that he begins to grab chairs in the classroom and smash them and break them into pieces. And finally, one of the other teachers says to him something like, Alexander the Great was a truly great man, but why break chairs? He says, this is government property. So this is Gogol combining his character sketching with a kind of almost wicked sense of humor. And this pervades the whole story. In fact, the little epitaph of the story is, and you'll see why it's relevant, it's don't blame the mirror, it's your face that is crooked. This is Gogol's sort of little motto for this story. Now, as the story goes, there is an inspector general who's due to come from Petersburg to this Russian town to sort of whip everybody into shape and hold all these malefactors accountable. And the reason that the town knows about it is because the postmaster of the town is a guy who always opens letters and reads them and then reseals the envelope. And so he got a letter that someone was sent to someone in the town saying, hey, the postmaster general is coming, and so you better be careful. Make sure that you haven't got anything that they can get you for. And so the postmaster now knows, the inspector general is coming. So he rushes to the mayor and he gives him the news. He says, listen, this inspector general is going to be in disguise. He's going to be in plain clothes. We're not going to know who he is. And so the mayor is immediately extremely worried. The mayor tells all the town councilmen, they're worried. Everybody knows they're running a racket. And so they're trying to figure out, when is this inspector general going to show up? Well, as it turns out, two of the guys in the town go to a bar, and they see a man that they don't recognize. And this man appears to be from St. Petersburg, and he's in an argument with the bartender who's like, you haven't paid your bill. This guy's like, man, I'm from Petersburg. You can't talk to me like that, and so on. And so the two guys who are watching this go, man, that's the inspector general. That's the guy from Petersburg. That's the guy we have to watch out for. So they rush to the town council and the mayor and they say, listen, we figured it out. Now, of course, they're completely wrong. This guy is kind of a bum from Petersburg. In fact, he's a little bit of a scoundrel himself. He doesn't have any money. He's trying to bum off some free drinks. And so he's not the inspector general, but they think he is. And this is where Gogol's kind of story takes off, because what happens is the mayor and the town council, they show up at the bar. In fact, the two guys say, listen, you better rush over to the bar because we don't want to make him any angrier than he is already. And right now, the bartender is kind of infuriating him. So we got to go deal with the situation. So essentially, the big men, the big guys of the town, go over to the bar. They mollify the quote inspector general. And they tell the guy, listen, don't be upset. Don't worry about this issue of your bar bill. We'll take care of it. And besides, you look like a guy who's a little out of sorts. Perhaps you need a little bit of money. And the guy's like, well, yeah, I could use a little bit of money. So they start plying him with rubles, 50 rubles, 100 rubles. And what are they doing? They're using the time-tested Russian scheme of bribery to try to get the inspector general off their back. This is Russia. And in Russia, as in so many places, bribery always works. The mayor invites this so-called inspector general to his own house, and then Gogol sort of carries things too far, where basically the mayor's wife comes out, the mayor's daughter comes out. This guy's like, wow, they both look pretty good. So he starts making the moves in a kind of ridiculous way with both the mayor's wife and his daughter at the same time. And they're like, who are you? And like, who do you know in Petersburg? And so on. And he's like, well, he knows Pushkin's a really good friend of mine. So this guy's basically making stuff up, pretending to be this really important guy, and then the business people of the town show up, and the business people of the town are like, man, we've got a lot of complaints. Our life is so hard. They tell the so-called inspector general, and then they start plying him with gifts. They're like, here are some samples from my store. Here are some things that you surely you're going to want to take home with you, and so this guy is like laden with not only bribes but gifts. And then he decides, listen, things are going so well for me. I better get the heck out of here before these guys wisen up. And so he gets in a troika, basically a carriage drawn by 3 horses, and he takes off. He leaves the town. And when he leaves the town, the mayor is very excited because the mayor thinks he now has this important new contact, this important ally in St. Petersburg. And the mayor basically tells everyone, listen, from now on, all of you are going to really have to listen to me because I've got really important friends. And if you cross me the wrong way, you might be sent to Siberia because I'm able to use my leverage, my influence with my new friend, the inspector general. But just when the mayor is doing this, the postmaster kind of taps him on the shoulder and says, well, sir, there's a little bit of a problem. And the mayor's like, don't bother me now, I'm really busy. But the postmaster general is like, listen, you need to know this. It turns out I found a letter, and it turns out, of course, the postmaster has opened a letter. A letter from who? A letter from this guy, the guy who just took off, the guy who just left town. And the mayor's like, you opened a letter from the inspector general? The postmaster's like, he's not the inspector general. In fact, read this letter that he's writing to his friends back in Petersburg, where he's making fun of all of us. He's ridiculing our entire town. He says we're a bunch of idiots. He says that you're a moron. He says that the school teacher's a fool. The whole place is being run by losers. So his letter is essentially a kind of devastating expose of all the greed and sloth and ineptitude of the town. And everybody is absolutely horrified, as in fact the letter begins to go one by one into each major character, and every time a character's name comes up, they're so embarrassed. They're like, please stop reading, you don't have to read that aloud. But of course the postmaster is like, listen, no, I gotta keep going, I gotta finish. And then as his reading of the letter draws to a close, and this is, of course, Gogol's perfect climax to the story, there's a loud announcement, and someone says, everyone to attention! The inspector general has arrived from Petersburg. Everyone has to report to him at once. And then in Gogol's, this was written as a play. In this story, the play version of it, the drama, the way Gogol has is that everyone freezes. People freeze in the astonished expressions that they have when they discover that the real inspector general is here. They can't speak, and the curtain comes down. Now, interestingly, when this story was published in Russia, it generated a kind of remarkable controversy. The Tsar, first of all, who was not a really very tolerant man, Nicholas I, recognized that the target of the story was really Russia. And he goes, everyone got what was coming, and I worst of all. So he sort of took it that this was an expose not just of one town, but really of all of Russia. Now, in Russia, there were sort of 2 groups of critics. There were the traditionalists who liked the old Russia, and then there were the innovators. And the traditionalists said, Gogol has slandered Russia. Gogol is demeaning the Russian people. Gogol is basically, in a sense, proving to be disloyal to his own country. The innovators, or the people who wanted Russia to change, said, Gogol is showing how backward we are. Gogol is exposing the fact that Russia needs to change. Russia needs to come into the modern era. Russian government needs to be more accountable. And while all of this was going on, someone approached Gogol and said, well, what do you think? Which side do you take between the traditionalists and the innovators? Are you an innovator calling for a new Russia? And Gogol, in typical Gogolian style, said, no, my story has nothing to do with any of that. My story is actually about the Last Judgment. In other words, for Gogol, at least the way he explained it, and maybe he was being somewhat wry or sarcastic, he basically said, listen, think about the line in the Bible, watch ye therefore, for ye know not when the master cometh. This is a line, by the way, that was quoted in the Shawshank Redemption, but the idea here is that the Inspector General is divine accountability, to which, for all our sloth and all our greed and all our ineptitude, we are all in the end inevitably subject.